Greetings and welcome to another Time for Tea podcast. For those of you that are just listening on audio rather than watching the video, I have actually got a cup of tea in my hands. And actually, Ian, who I'm speaking to, have you got a cup of tea in your hands?
I've got a cup of tea, yeah.
Wonderful.
In my favourite mug. So
there you go, perfectly aligned. Anyway, welcome to this podcast. We're trying to do, as you're probably well aware if you're subscribing and listening, a whole range of different podcasts on everything from deep dives and technology, and we've got another one of them coming up very soon, through to talking about what's happening in the industry, etc. And I thought it would be great to do a podcast with Ian, who's one of our relatively new recruits, although 4 months in now. Yeah. So Ian, first of all, welcome to Appear, very belatedly, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Good to have you with us. Do you want to give us a real quick background of where you've come from and what you've done before you've joined Appear, and then we can talk about the stuff that's happening now?
Yeah, so I was a BBC lifer. So I've been at the BBC for nearly 30 years, not quite 30 years. And I started in news, actually, which was really quite good fun. And the joy of news, especially, news covers everything. Yeah. So you're doing live TV, you're doing recorded stuff. And I was one of the first generation really of multi-skilled operators. And it was at a time when news was kind of going through, we used to have specialist skills like camera operators and sound operators and all of that. And then they suddenly thought, actually, why don't we get people to do everything? So I came in as a news trainee back in the mid 90s. Within my first week, I was operating studio cameras, and then but also doing things like sound and OBs and satellite operations as they came on board. And it was a time of great transition, really, within news, where we started to sort of, in the latter part of my time with them, we were training journalists to shoot and edit on laptops, which and I started on tape, and
that was a big transformation.
That was a big transformation, yeah, and I still love tape. I mean, and tape was fast. I think one of the fastest edits I ever did was about 5 minutes for the 6 o'clock news. It was you could really work on tape. But that time when we started to go digital, I started to learn a lot more about actually things like compression and workflows and stuff like that. And I kind of moved into a world where I was training journalists to shoot and edit. And then from there, I became a bit of a specialist in cameras and editing, and went over to work for, at that point, Vision Productions in the BBC, which is the area that made all of TV.
Yeah.
And I looked after Manchester and Birmingham. So I had quite a lot of shows where I was working as production innovation executive, looking at new ways of working, introduction of things like Final Cut Pro, desktop editing, across quite a few well-known brands. And then in their infinite wisdom, the BBC decided to move a whole bunch of people to Salford. So I got involved in the design of the studios at Salford. And that was a real learning experience again, because it was one of the first times when we started to look at complete end-to-end digital workflows, and we got rid of tape. We were going HD at the same time as well. So there's a whole bunch of change that was happening during that period. And at the end of all of that, I joined BBC R&D initially just to help them out engineering managing on a big project they were doing up in Glasgow at the Commonwealth Games. And what was significant about that project was that it was the first time that we'd ever done anything with IP. So we took the VSF TR-03. You probably remember. You probably wrote it actually. We took that standard and we did an entire remote production with cameras on the venues in Glasgow, and then we had galleries in Manchester and Salford, and we had commentary in London, and we brought it all together, all in UHD, all in 4K. And this is back in 2014. And then those, and I was engineering manager, and I was looking at these massive racks of equipment thinking, this is never going to catch on. But fast forward 10 or so years, and we're still battling with it. But it was a great learning experience. And then I joined R&D full time, really looking at how we could take technologies from R&D and get them into the mainstream, both within the BBC and the wider industry, and lots of industry engagement at that point. And I think it's about that time that I probably came across you and
Yeah.
some of your work.
Yeah, so I guess it's the last 10 years that, in my former life and your BBC life, that we had quite a lot of interaction on different technologies in terms of trialing and looking to the future. Yeah.
Particularly around 5G, which is probably the one that I did a lot of work on in my latter time with R&D.
Yeah.
And private 5G networks. And people are probably, if they know me, they probably know me for a lot of that work. Yeah.
Yeah. Just Google it, peoples. Anyway, that's cool. So roll on to March 2025. So I know we obviously had some conversations at the very back end of last year and talked about the possibility of you coming on board. And sometime during March this year, you joined us, which was very exciting. So thanks for making the jump. So a couple of quick questions for you on that, I guess. One is what made you kind of willing or want to jump to Vendorland, and I guess what are your first 4-month impressions of being in Vendorland, but specifically working with the Appear team?
I think it was a bit of a restructure that was going on at the BBC at the time, and that kind of leads you to look at other areas and sort of decide if that's where you want to be. And I was kind of reaching a point in my career where I thought, actually, well, I could stay here for the next 10 years, but where am I going to go from there?
Yeah.
Or actually look at doing something a little bit new and exciting. And I think one of my frustrations, I guess, at R&D was quite often you have some great ideas and you're working with great people, but there's no end product that you can influence at the end. All you can do is influence industry and hope they follow along. And so the challenge of actually working with a sort of in almost that end-to-end bit about where we're coming up with great ideas, working with industry, but actually seeing that go right the way through to product and then end users is really exciting. And I've had a chance to do a little bit of that in the past 4 months. And so particularly the vision to be sort of leading in the world of production, some of the things we talked about around those industry engagement things, which was really things that I was doing anyway, but actually just having a little bit more ways to influence them, I think is key. So lots of good reasons. And and 4 months in, I think it's a good move. I'm enjoying it. It's quite strange some days because I'm still dealing with the same people and doing some of the similar things that I was doing.
And you're still talking to me.
And I'm still talking to you, but there are other things that I'm learning all the time. About the product set, but also how people use them, how they integrate into workflows, and also working with different people across the board. And probably the most common question I get is, what's it like, working on the vendor side? And my answer to that is, it's the same. But the big difference is, I think, the competition element. So the broadcasters, although they're in competition in terms of audiences, they all have the same problems, and they all join together and they kind of describe those problems and work together to try and solve them. And it's a very sort of almost a collaborative effort. And I think in Vendorland we can be a little bit more judgmental, I guess, of our frenemies, I think you call them, are the people we work with and stuff like that. And so that side of things has not taken a massive amount of time to adjust. It's obviously completely understandable, but it's one of those things where you've just got to be. You can't be everybody's best friend.
I think that's true. Yeah, I go between frenemies and competitors. I think as my two go-to words. I do think in the pure technical space, I mean, quite a lot of the other CTOs of our biggest competitors I can name as really good industry friends because we are at that level, pure tech level, we're collaborative. But obviously, the frenemy competitor thing is also
That's
a
the commercial
challenge you're
teams.
aware of. Yeah,
Yeah, it's the
on the
commercial teams
side.
that have that. But what's really interesting, I think, as we're moving more to a kind of IP and software, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure later, but as we're starting to build these software-based ecosystems, we need to work with our partners more than ever. We can't just hand off an SDI cable and expect somebody else to pick it up. We need to be far more tightly integrated. And therefore, I think you're right, at a technical level, we absolutely need to make sure that we're working together. At a commercial level, obviously that becomes slightly maybe a different question.
Yeah. And I think as you've obviously been well aware for many years, I mean that working together and collaborating technically has been a real passion of mine. For the industry. So it's good to have you on board with that similar mindset, which is cool. Okay, so let's kind of so that's a good potted history and background of getting here. Oh, it's also worth saying that I think you do enjoy playing large brass instruments in the musical sense.
Yeah, I'm a tuba player for my sins. So I play with brass bands up in the north of England, a couple of them par bands as well. I think you've seen the Lederhosen picks, and
they're worth checking out on Google as well. People,
I'm not sure they're on Google.
Okay. Oh, they can be soon.
I think they're behind the firewall. But yeah, no, and actually, and I know you're a musician as well. What I love about that sort of 2 to 4 hours a week that you kind of do it is you can't think about anything else. You've just got to go and absorb yourself in that team effort of making music, but it just kind of clears your brain, and that's all you focus on for those few hours. And I think it's important for everyone to sort of have that space outside to be able to do that, because especially in our world where a lot of the stuff we're doing is thinking a lot. And sometimes you can become kind of quite obsessed with, am I right? Am I wrong? Or, what does that mean? Or, you're constantly thinking. So being able to just kind of switch off and do something else, I think is really important.
Yeah, very cathartic indeed. Cool. Okay, so let's fast forward on to kind of the stuff that's happening now with, and very specifically the stuff that you're involved in, with your peer hat on now. So maybe it's worth just outlining some of the key industry activities and initiatives that you've been helping to lead and drive and participate in since you've come on board. Do you want to just give us an overview? Then we can dive into a few of those.
Yeah. So you threw me in at the deep end, really. I think within week one, you put me on a plane to Canada and sent me over to CBC to meet a lot of the EBU, a lot of our EBU colleagues who are working on this thing called Media Exchange.
Yeah.
I'd had a bit of a exposure to that, I think, before I joined, particularly through work with the dynamic media facilities at the EBU work. But that's led to a whole bunch of stuff, and we'll come back to that, I'm sure. So a lot of work around that sort of media exchange and the idea of how we interoperate with other vendors in a software space.
Yep.
But I've also been heavily involved in a couple of IBC accelerators. I'm starting to do little bits of work looking at our engagements with things like the industry bodies like SIMTI and DPP and a few other bits like that. But also, importantly, reaching out to partners in our ecosystem. So looking where perhaps we've got places in our workflow where we want to work with others to improve the customer experience, really, and make sure that we're absolutely tied up with partners who can offer things that perhaps we can't. And therefore enable the end users to sort of build ecosystems that suit their needs, really.
Yeah. Cool. So let's just look at media exchange in general for a couple of minutes, because obviously that's a topic, that's something that's been close to my heart, moving to asynchronous compute from our linear SDI or 2110 connected world. And there's obviously been different initiatives that have been happening in this industry. And one of the things that it's been exciting me this year is we seem to be converging, and I think hopefully getting the industry into one place. It's not been a fully smooth road. There's been a few bumps in the last few months, I think it's fair to say, but I'm quite excited about the future of convergence. Do you want to just outline, from your perspective, what's happening, and from the bits you've been involved in there? That would be good.
Yeah, it's probably just worth touching really on what we mean by media exchange as well,
Yeah.
because it's a relatively new topic, and there's a lot of people still sort of trying to understand what it is. So essentially, in a conventional world or an old world, we if we wanted to move media from one vendor's piece of kit to another vendor's piece of kit, we'd plug in a cable, whether that was XLR, whether that was SDI, Ethernet, whatever. We'd plug in a cable, and we could move the video from one place to another. Now there might need to be some translation going on in that space, maybe some compression, and if we're going over the internet and all that kind of stuff. But in a software world, in order to do that, we really need to use a whole bunch of compute resources to move that media around. And we might need to put things like SRT wrapping around it. We might need to encode video. And all of that takes a lot of processing power within the compute, and also a lot of time. And what we saw in the high performance compute world is this idea of memory exchange, where two different functions can share some memory. One can write to it, one can read from it. And in that point, you can bypass a whole bunch of processes. So once you've got the data in one piece of memory, you can share that with another computer, and that computer can read the data from it. So therefore, you don't need to compress, you don't need to wrap things up, you can move things around a lot more quickly, you can reduce the resources required within a cloud or software on-prem environment to do that. So that's it really in its simplest form. It's a way of moving media around.
Yeah, and I think the other bit, which again has been one of my industry campaigns probably for the last 3 years on this, is the asynchronicity of it, because we have been so wedded to the concept of a linear propagation of things. And you talked about latency already, but that incurs latency, but also it incurs processing for compute to behave like that, and compute works best burstily and asynchronously. And what we need to do as an industry is play to that native behavior of compute in the way we use it.
And I think we'll get there, but I think we're probably maybe a year away before we start to see some of that coming up. We've got to get the sort of basic understanding of actually how do we just move media from one application to another. And I don't think we can underestimate that. And there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot. We built rods for our own backs because we've got so many video formats, so many audio formats, and I don't even mean within compression. Even just things like frame rates and things like that, and all of these things need considering, testing, building, and every time you build something, you find another little fault, and so you have to kind of keep iterating and iterating and iterating.
So just outline for us where we're at right now. So where has media exchange got to in the industry?
So probably the biggest thing that everyone's heard of is the Linux Foundation work, and particularly around what the EBU call media exchange layer, or MXL. So that's really a piece of work that kicked off, I think it was November, wasn't it, last year-ish, certainly after IBC. And that's what led to the Canada meeting and all of that kind of stuff. But effectively what was decided through that process was that this was not something that one manufacturer could do and expect everyone else to adopt, and it wasn't something that the end users could kind of dictate how they wanted to do it. It needs to be a sort of collaboration of a lot of people to build a standardized, and I'll come back to that word standardized in a minute, but to build a workflow that works for everyone, and a way of doing this thing for everyone. And obviously we could have standardized that. We could have gone through Synty and, but that takes time. And the one thing that we really don't have in this space is time. There are people who want to be able to use this early next year, and they'll be built on that. And the other thing with standards is they're always a compromise. So I think, having gone through that process quite a lot as an industry over the past 5 to 10 years. There's quite a wariness behind it. And when we look at what the compute industry do and the way that things like open source software works, and particularly the kind of work that goes on in places like the Linux Foundation, you can see far more quick adoption of ways of working.
Yeah.
And that's what the EBU team and the vendors who are working with them really wanted to happen. So they basically in June this year, a lot of work in the background that we were involved in, but we launched a Linux Foundation project, which is basically a GitHub repository with a whole bunch of reference code on there, and we're having weekly calls to kind of accelerate and push through getting the MXL stuff done the way it should be done. And there's lots of people working together and trying to solve the issues and submitting code and all of that. And that's growing quite rapidly. We're seeing new members join that every week. But that wasn't the start of it. I think there was a whole bunch of work that was done prior to that in both by the EBU in the dynamic media facilities world, and the VSF in their ground to cloud, cloud to ground that I know you're involved in as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of things in there. And then the other one that we're involved in is imaginatively called LMX, which is Live Media Exchange.
Bound to confuse everyone.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Yeah.
But that's an IBC accelerator. And the IBC accelerators are really good because they basically take a problem and then people, again, come together to solve it, but really from a more practical point of view. So whereas the Linux Foundation work is working on the code and the kind of software elements in there, what
underlying tech.
Yeah, and what we're trying to do in the accelerator is just use it and just do some practical implementations and share it with other partners in that space. And that's been really valuable because it kind of highlights a lot of the time what we don't know and really just flags some of the things that, where the problems are. Some people can get grumpy about it because it's not just all there and working, but it's a process and we just need to kind of go through it. So
what's the timeline on those accelerators and what just outline the couple that we've got some involvement in?
Yeah, so the timeline is obviously delivery for IBC. So they start in April with a problem, and you deliver at IBC in September with a whole bunch of presentations, demonstrations. Hall 14, come and see us. But yeah, it's a very aggressive timeline, and sometimes the technology is not ready. So particularly on the LMX one, we've kind of been waiting for the Linux Foundation to kind of be set up, and there's it's a slow process, and all the time we're thinking, okay, how can we demonstrate this, and but also we're bringing together the work that was done in VSF that I mentioned previously and the Linux Foundation and identifying problems. So it's not going to be a kind of shiny kind of reveal moment. It's a very, very process driven
what's and all.
Yeah, exactly. And that's great. So yeah, really aggressive timeline. But what we'll hopefully see at IBC is demonstrations that show moving media around, obviously, but that's quite dull. We can see that anyway. But it's just going to be assets moving from one application to another, and that. But the magic is really about the timing and about the CPU load and stuff like that. So we're currently just thinking about how we can demonstrate that, whether we can sort of show a process with high levels of load on it in a traditional way, and then show the same process happening faster with no compute load and things like that. So we'll see that. But the big win from that is just really getting it to work.
And also, I guess, exposing it to the greater industry, because although, as you're saying, we've got quite a few people involved now, it's still probably a pretty small subset of the totality of the industry. And I think one of the things, although I still have some regrets on some of the technical decisions we made on 2110, one of the things we did manage to get was industry consensus. So it's good to actually... it's good to get to that point and get enough exposure, so hopefully we get like a critical mass of take up.
And I do think it's going to be a big talking point this year at IBC. I think everyone's going to be. I think it'll be quite a hot topic. In the same way that I think last year that kind of final realization that software was here to stay,
Mm.
and that everyone's kind of moving to software. And yeah, so that's that project. The other one we've been involved in, really as part of the VSF, is Master Control Room in the Cloud, MCC. And that one's, again, looking at the problem that broadcasters face, in that in order to take something that's been produced in the web and is going to be distributed in the web, they have to bring it through a traditional sort of broadcast MCR workspace. And that's challenging because there's a whole bunch of people, hardware, kit, that's quite costly for what is essentially a web production. So their thinking is, okay, well, what if we can just move all of that functionality in the cloud, all of that functionality that you have in a traditional broadcast MCR into the cloud? And actually, we hit a big milestone on that this past weekend, because we were working with RTE out in Dublin to do an athletics event that went straight out to RTE player online. And we used our X20 platform to create the ground to cloud. And then for the first time, and this is a really exciting bit, we used our VX platform running in AWS to manage some of those flows and hand off into other vendors who were running their software underneath. So it was a great opportunity for us to kind of try out a real world workflow that we've been envisaging for a few months now, and kind of really demonstrate that actually it works almost as expected.
And a plug for more about VX and any of our other technology. If you're coming to IBC, make sure you come to our booth, as well as going to the accelerator stuff in Hall 14. So, yeah.
And you could see more of that. We're also working with BT to show that demo again as that workflow as a partner stand on the BT booth as well.
Great. Hey, wonderful. Well, it's been a fun 4 months then. There's been a lot of stuff happening there, which is good.
It's been a steep learning curve, but I think I'm just about getting. Don't ask me to configure an X20, but I can just about work out what it does now.
That's cool. And I think probably what we should do in maybe about 6 months' time is do a bit of an update on this, just so we can outlay, what progress has been made across the industry, because it's a fast-moving and exciting time. And I did put very boldly up at a presentation I did, I think back in February at one of the industry events, saying 2025 is going to be the year that we actually nail, a way of doing compute-based open media exchange for live production. So I do still hold to that.
I think, but I don't think it'll be the end of it.
No. We actually cement a direction.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of work to do, particularly as we kind of look at large scale workflows and distributed workflows. But hey, that's another conversation.
Absolutely. We'll do that later. Well, it's great to have you on board. Thanks for the time today to have a good chat. If anyone's got any questions, you're always very welcome to email us. You can get in touch via LinkedIn or whatever. We'd love to hear from you. And I think looking at the clock and looking at my cup, I think it's time to go and get another cup of tea. So thanks for the chat, Ian. And we'll talk again later.
Cheers.
Thank you.